I would throw up a picture of 25 tabs of acid in the afternoon, and by 8, 9 o'clock, they would all be gone because everyone would see the post, and then you just delete it. It's that simple. Once a new pill got introduced, within generally a week, all the kids that were doing drugs would be on it. The most vivid recollection I have of that is when Ambien first got introduced. With drugs, it's always a fleeting feeling you're chasing, especially with opioids, because nothing is going to feel as good as that first high or first overdose. So it's a fleeting feeling you're constantly chasing. But when you're working with people, helping them get into recovery, it's the substantive thing you can do every single day that is benefiting your life and someone else's life. And it's something that can be there forever. Like, you can have that relationship with them forever.
I'm Justin, the Addiction Guy, and boy, do we have a great first episode for you today. Did you know that kids are overdosing on fentanyl in schools these days? And have you ever wondered how drugs get into schools? My first guest has been through all of this and more and has lived to tell the tale. And he's here to try to contribute and be part of a solution to this problem. I first heard Noah speak at an event called One Pill Can Kill. The series was designed to prevent fentanyl overdose through education. Tragically, a lot of the people who showed up had already learned from experience. Hastings, where I see the front lines of addiction in a mental health unit, there are many news articles recently citing that opioid overdose deaths in the town of Hastings are higher per capita than neighboring towns. And this community really wants to try to solve this problem. And they don't want to lose any more young lives. So the One Pill Can Kill events by United Way of Hastings were a really good cause. And it was a great opportunity to get out into that town from the hospital and actually meet the people that were affected by addiction. So in this episode, we're actually going to talk about dealing drugs in school. The structure of the problem is vast. There's a lot of moving parts. And my theory is that it has a greater systemic origin that starts right here at home. And after listening to Noah's jaw-dropping stories, I still have a lot of questions. For instance, why is there so much demand for these drugs? The demand is coming from inside the house. And we're going to start to find solutions, and we're going to start to talk about solutions. And I would love to hear any of your ideas for how we can solve this fentanyl overdose crisis in this country. Send me your thoughts so we can broaden the dialogue at setyoursellfreepod@gmail.com. You can find more episodes at justinthomascollection.com and click on the podcast tab to join our mailing list. What was it like growing up in your hometown?
Cottage Grove. Well, there's nothing to do, so we were always like, there's nothing to do, so we use drugs as an excuse. Like, it was something to do. But also there's, I want to say, I guess, a culture of ignorance. Like, both parents and kids never understood like the effects all these drugs can have on us. I feel like I've said drugs like 1,000 times, but we didn't know the effects it could have on us. So a big culture of ignorance. And there was just a culture like, this is kind of what everyone does. We all partake somehow.
What kind of drugs were the parents using?
My girlfriend's mom was addicted to opioids. She would sell me her opioids. I mentioned one of my really good friends, his dad would sell me his oxy and codeine every month. A lot of the parents we had another parent who would sell us her school buses every month. Those are the 2 milligram yellow Xanax every month. So they were on the same things as we were. There were also some on meth, but they were on the same things we were, the benzos and opioids we were on. And we would get stuff from them. There was another parent who would sell us hydromorphone. So the drug use of the parents leaked down into the kids as well, because we would get stuff from them. And they would also be on the same stuff that we're on. So It was kind of the culture. This is what everyone does, so there's nothing wrong with it.
How do you think most of those parents got on to this stuff?
Um, Honestly, probably the same way we did, just experimenting in high school. And there were also some of them with injuries that were first prescribed opioids because of their injuries, but then became incredibly addicted to them. And we also saw that out here in Hastings. Um, First of all, we would just hang out here. It's a beautiful town. We would go to get high and go to Spring Lake Park Reserve or swim in the St. Croix near the grain mill. But there were parents addicted to opioids here that would sell us their pills when they needed to sell them too. It's where one of my big dealers, her mom lived here in Hastings and would sell stuff to us. And that dealer lived in Maplewood, so we would travel out there to get stuff from her. So definitely in Cottage Grove and the Hastings area where I grew up, it's like everyone does this. It not just parents, but the children as well. And it's even people like you wouldn't expect, like honor students. I was selling Ativan and LSD to a ton of honor students because they wanted to trip like the Beatles, and also had so much pressure from being an honor student from their parents that they would take Ativan for their anxiety and Xanax for their anxiety. So it's even people you wouldn't like expect or look at as drug dealers. Like there was a private Christian school very close to where we lived, and all those kids would come to me for LSD and benzos because they wanted to trip like people from the 60s, and used those benzos because of the high pressure environment they were in school, because they were expected to be high honor students. So it's even people you don't expect or look at as a drug user.
What does it feel like to take steps towards the end of high school in this world as it is right now?
It's horrifying. There is less government assistance than ever before. The boomers had the highest amount of government assistance when it comes to student school loans, welfare, and first time house buyers. We have essentially none of that. Um, a college degree only gets you so far. 40% of college graduates can't get a job in their field. Um, uh, Wages have not kept up with inflation whatsoever, particularly um, the minimum wage as well. And we know this stuff. We're not stupid just because we're teenagers. But the wealth disparity is insane. So like trying to get into this world just to live a stable life is terrifying. That was part of the reason where even though I got sober at 17, I didn't start working till I was 21 because of how terrified I was getting into the world, and my mental health was a wreck. So like that made my fear of getting out into the world more terrifying too. It is overwhelming. Millennials have been screwed for a while. Gen Z is screwed just because like our policies right now are horrific. Like we need to learn from Europe how to help the youth, and it's sad we're not doing that because of the culture here.
And so that stress adds to trying these stress relieving pills. And what's the
Exactly.
attitude like in these towns towards addiction?
It's just ignored. Like we were kicked out of school. We weren't helped. They would kick us out of class if we were too messed up. They would kick us out of school. It was like they just wanted to get rid of the kids that were suffering from addiction. They didn't want to help us. And the parents are just like at a loss of what to do because you can ground your kid, but then someone will bring drugs to their through their window at night for them. So like
Are they buying it online too?
yeah, it's so easy. And it doesn't even have to be illegal things. Yes, you can buy illegal things through Snapchat, through Instagram, through Twitter. You can buy gray market, non illegal drugs, like legal benzodiazepines and opioids over the internet that even if you get caught with, they can't take because it isn't scheduled in the United States. And you have people just making them in labs throughout China, Canada, the United States, Holland, um, Denmark, all over the place and then just shipping them all over the world, these gray market drugs that aren't technically illegal. And I think that is not being looked at enough. Because you have these benzos that are incredibly potent, like atizolam, and opioids that are incredibly potent, like U508, that aren't illegal, but you could just get on the internet. Like, why are we not paying attention to that in the fentanyl analogs? But
How do
yeah,
you think these dealers are finding and seeking young people to deal them drugs through things like Snapchat?
well, they don't even have to seek. You could just put up a post, and then people will come to you. You don't you don't have to seek anyone out. People will seek you out. All you have to do is put up a post. And what a lot of people will do is send out mass friend requests or whatever it is or mass follow people to get people to follow them back. And people will just follow back, like follow for follow, and then throw up a post, and all those people will see it. I sold my LSD through Snapchat. You just throw up a photo, and then everyone who you're friends with is going to message you. You don't even have to seek people out, they will seek you out.
So there's the demand, and the social media is the tool.
It is often the tool. It is often the tool because it makes any type of communication easier. So, of course, it's going to make drug dealing communication easier as well. I mean, I would throw up a picture of 25 tabs of acid in the afternoon, and by 8, 9 o'clock, they would all be gone because everyone would see the post, and then you just delete it. It's that simple.
And where were your parents?
It was always kind of complicated. Even before I came into the picture, my dad was a terrible person. So there was so much fear, and I felt that fear from a very early age. And my mom would lock her and I in the bathroom because he would go on these violent, screaming tirades. So as long as I can remember, it was fear growing up, and that sensation of walking on eggshells, I guess. And they ended up getting divorced when I was 6, and I almost remember being relieved, um, because I thought, okay, they're not going to be yelling anymore. But that only made things worse because my stepmom came into the picture, and she was incredibly abusive. And I so desperately wanted to live with my mom, but I was afraid that if I said I didn't want to live with my dad, that he would kill me. Um, and him and my stepmom really manipulated the hell out of me. So I ended up being stuck with them for years, and then I escaped to my mom's house until I was, wow, probably 13, until I was, no, 12. Until I was 12, I only saw my mom 2 to 4 days a month. And I was stuck at my mom or my dad's and my stepmom's, just trapped in a cycle of abuse, fear, and isolation because they didn't let me be friends with other kids. So I was stuck in my room, and my escape was books. I've always been a nerd. As long as I can remember, my escape when I was younger was science. So that's what I used as an escape to get out of that cycle of abuse. And there was a lot of depersonalization as well. I wasn't allowed to get my own haircut. They chose my clothes every day. They chose what I could eat. They chose what I could do. They chose the shows I could watch on TV. The only thing they didn't choose was the books I could read. So I really just was trapped in my room diving into books all the time. Because even when I was trapped in my room, my stepmom would come in and hurl verbal and emotional abuse at me. So seriously, I was just trapped in a world of books. Um, and really never had friends until I escaped to my mom's when I was about 13, 12 or 13. Yeah.
How were drugs available to you in the home?
Yeah. Well, that first started actually at my mom's. I was 11 when my first experience with drugs.
Were you ever curious about them? Were you afraid of them?
I wasn't curious. Well, I was very curious because ever since I was a little kid, even like 4 or 5, I took sleeping medications because I've always had night terrors. So I was more curious because I already had some experience with how they affect you, I guess. And through my reading, I found pharmacology very interesting as a kid. And I also grew up listening to Eminem, so like I knew about drugs through his music as well. And my Do you want me to talk about my first experience?
Yeah, can you describe what happened that day?
Yeah, so I was at my mom's probably about a month before. My stepdad and my brother and I were out playing hockey. He slipped a disc in his back, and they gave him like 90 hydrocodone, the 5 milligram ones. And if you don't know what hydrocodone is, that's Vicodin. That's the common name. And he's always been like the macho. I'm not going to take meds. So I knew what it was from Eminem's song "Deja Vu" and from just reading. And so I took 5 of them, and I just went back to reading in my bed. And like 25 minutes later, I felt like this unimaginable warmth come over me. And my I have had crippling anxiety ever since I was a kid, and that was completely overtaken by this unimaginable warmth spreading through my body, and I was just melting into my bed. And I remember being so overtaken by the feeling that I put my book down, and I was just laying there for probably about 3-4 hours, feeling the feeling wash over me, and just laying there and feeling it and being so grateful that I found something that finally makes me feel like I'm safe and okay in the world and not an anxious wreck.
So you didn't feel safe in your own home?
No, I never did. I always had the fear that I would be cornered and abused by my stepdad or stepmom and dad. Um, and I every night I would blare this song. It's a Matchbox 20 song called "Unwell," and listen to it and cry myself to sleep. And I would think this is the night they're gonna come in and kill me, because they would corner me and hurl abuse at me for hours and hours at a time. I I was never safe, ever. There was no love in the house. And they were very manipulative people. Like, they would do one nice thing for you a month, but then they would use that one nice thing to manipulate you and further the abuse for the rest of the month. Yeah, they were awful people.
So what was life like going to school?
Well, I wasn't really allowed friends until I escaped to my mom's when I was, yeah, I would say I was 12. And I first made friends then in middle school. I didn't have friends in elementary school because of my dad and the stepmom's rules.
They isolated you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So when I was 12 and with my mom, she let me have friends, and that was kind of an alien experience. I didn't know how to make friends at first. So the first friends I made were kind of outcasts that also did drugs, and had experience with drugs. And, those kind of became my people, because they were the only people I really knew how to relate to, because we could relate over drugs. I mean, I never had anything to relate to with other kids because I wasn't allowed to relate. And then that really escalated going into high school, where the entire relationship revolved around drugs. Like, that was our entire friendship. Um, there was nothing really substantive outside of the relationship being about drugs. And if there weren't drugs, we wouldn't hang out.
So did that start to happen after 11, after the first time you kind of found access to drugs?
Yeah, and you find once you start meeting other kids, like, you start finding access to drugs being really easy, like, not just in your own home.
How
Uh,
did you discover other sources of drugs at
I,
11?
yeah, well, it's really so I didn't have any other connections when I was 11. It was just in my own home. But when I was 12, like, when you start meeting other kids, like, they will have a big brother that can get them this. They will have a cousin. They will have a parent who has this in their medicine cabinet. Like, you just start making those relationships organically. And sometimes you can seek them out, but a lot of the time it'll just fall in your lap, that someone will have access to this. And it's really, I don't know, a lot of it isn't planned. A lot of it isn't planned, but really just through other kids and their connections with older family members.
So it sounds like there is active drug dealing and at least pill kind of distribution in schools. Can you tell me kind of what you know about what that looked like in your school?
Yeah, I can. Well, it's really easy to get pills from a medicine cabinet or order them online. You could order 1,000 Xanax bars and they will be uh, delivered right to your doorstep. And that's a big way that kids in my town would get drugs was through the internet. So one kid would order a mass supply of a pill, or they would find someone in real life who can get that for them. They would bring that pill to school, and it's like a pyramid. They would sell that to three people, and then those three people would sell to three more people over and over like that until it proliferated the entire environment of the school. Like once a new pill got introduced, within generally a week, all the kids that were doing drugs would be on it. The most vivid recollection I have of that is when Ambien first got introduced. There was one kid, he got it, and he sold it to a couple of us, and then we started selling to all the other kids. And within a week, over half the school was on it, and you had kids walking around like zombies during class, uh, and asking bizarre questions and having hallucinations during class. And the rest of the class would know what's happening, that what this kid was on and why they were acting that way, but it was just an open secret. No one would say anything.
I have to pause the interview for just a moment to recognize the irony of this situation. In the ninth grade, I was wrongly accused of being a drug dealer in high school. I had printed off one of those AOL instant messenger chats and handed it out to all of my friends to try to prove that my neighbor was a bully and being mean to me. Little did I know that someone could take that conversation, retype it out, framing us both as coke dealers out of our lockers, and hand it to the faculty and the principal of the school. And if it was you who did it, I would really like to hear from you. If you're listening, let's let bygones be bygones and talk about what made you spend all that time typing out that conversation. As it turns out, they actually did catch some drug dealers in my high school as a result of that whole fiasco. And they were searching and interviewing a lot of people to try to find out how to end the drugs in school problem. So, I'd love to talk about that someday, but the mystery person is still at large. Let's get back to the interview with Noah. Did you have any friends get misdiagnosed or see mental health professionals because of that?
Well, myself, yeah. Man, see mental health professionals. A lot of the time, like we would get kicked out of class. I've definitely had that happen. Myself, yeah, because of my anxious outbursts, it was thought that I had ADHD, but it was just anxiety manifesting. Yeah, yeah. I guess that's what I know.
Did you get in trouble in school for distributing or being a part of this?
Oh yeah. So yeah, there was there was a couple of times where like teachers would just overhear conversations, so they would call me into the principal's office and be like, "Hey, we heard you talking about this," and of course you deny, deny, deny. But then they search your stuff, so you gotta have anything you bring into school very well hidden, because they will search you. And man, there were a couple times I should have been caught but didn't, just because I had the pills really well hidden. And beyond that, there was a time I overdosed in class. It was math class, first period, my sophomore year. In the morning, I had taken a bunch of Xanax and snorted some hydrocodone. and or oxycodone, sorry. And I went into class and I'm feeling super dizzy. I'm struggling to concentrate on the lecture. Uh, so I raise my hand and then go to stand up to say I'm going to the bathroom. And when I stand up, I collapse on the ground, and I am just on the ground out cold. And then I wake up like probably about 5-10 seconds later with the teacher standing over yelling at me like, what the fuck is going on? And I was just trying to say I need to go to the bathroom, but it sounded like gibberish. And he just yelled at me to get out of the room. So I like stumbled, half crawled into the bathroom and laid there for like 3 hours. No one came to get me. No one came to see if I was okay. I'm sure kids walked in and saw me in there, like in the stall, slumped up on the ground. And I just came to 3 hours later. I just went home. No one, no one tried to help me. And thankfully, that's changed. When someone overdoses now in the schools, generally there's a positive reaction where they try and help. But back in 2015, they didn't do that.
And so you were basically just told to go away?
Yeah, I was kicked out. And I mean, everyone knew I was off my rocker and really high. And I'm sure the teacher did too. Like, no one's just going to stand up, collapse, and then not be able to speak unless they're having a stroke. But we're teenagers. It's more than likely that we're on drugs. So yeah, no one came to help or anything. I was just stuck in that bathroom, nodding out and overdosing.
Why do you think the community, the leaders there, why do you think they reacted the way that they did to that overdose?
Ignorance, stigma. I think I think there's this perception that like people, and particularly teens who do drugs, are bad people, when that really isn't the case. We're just people, for the most part, trying to cover up or compensate for something that we're feeling or not feeling, and often for trauma as well and for mental health reasons. So we're looked at as bad people when we're really not. And then like ignorance as well, because I don't know, it's so many things. I think ignorance too, because they don't fully understand what's happening when someone's struggling with addiction or overdosing. And there's the punitive part of it too. They just want to get you in trouble instead of offering you help, or they just want to kick you out of school so they don't have to deal with you anymore. Instead of trying to take you by the hand and go, I'm going to help you through this, it's just kick them out and they're not my problem anymore.
What's the most dangerous thing that you got into in your experiences with this kind of behavior of reaching for these pills to sort of escape and
Drug wise or action wise?
um action wise?
Yeah, action wise was my friends and I. We bought like, I don't know, 40 Xanax. There were four of us. Went to the street races out in St. Paul. We each took our pills, but as the night went on, we ran out, so we started asking strangers for more at the street races. And eventually these guys say yes. So we're like, okay, what do you got? And they're like, meet us around the corner so people don't see us doing the transaction. And we're like, okay, no problem. We were totally trusting because we were super high and didn't care. And these three guys pulled guns on us. And man, that I still have flashbacks to that sometimes in my dreams. Just like the sensation of having a gun pressed into the back of your skull is frightening. And it's almost like you don't feel the fear while it's happening because you're so frozen. And as soon as the situation's done, the fear kicks in. And but when you're desperate for drugs, like you will do things you thought you would never do before, or get yourself into situations like that that you never thought you'd be in. Um, so it's not something you ever expect to happen to you until it does.
And what about the most dangerous kind of drug use you've done, like in school?
Um, well, I did. pretty much every drug I was ever addicted to in school. The most dangerous thing I did were like fentanyl patches in school. You, so we would get the fentanyl patches, and then you just take the gel out and smoke it, or you try and dissolve it in water and snort it or shoot it up. So doing that in school is probably the most dangerous thing I ever did. Um, but I mean, you don't really care. You just do it.
What was it like getting high like that?
Um, well, you would always bring enough to do at lunch too, because once you are so far down the rabbit hole with addiction, like you can't just use once in the morning and be cool throughout the day. So you got to make sure you have enough to use at lunch too. So you get high in the morning, you're feeling good for like first period, second period, most of the third period. Um, and you're just going about your day normally how you would. Like you're in class, you're trying to pay attention, you're just high. And a lot of the time too, you zone out because you're high. You're just lost in the feeling and you're not paying attention. But then as third period starts to wane and it's getting close to lunch, you start getting excited to go to the bathroom to do what you brought. So you'll snort your pills, you'll take them in the bathroom. Or if you were already into needles at that point, you would shoot up in the bathroom. I was just snorting things at that point. And then you go to do the rest of lunch happy, and you're good for the rest of the day then. But you always had to be careful with your dosing at school because you didn't want to be very I don't know how to describe it, like overly intoxicated so teachers would notice. So it was a balancing act. There would be some kids that would overdo it and be stumbling around. So it was a balancing act. And another way we would take drugs at school too is we would just dissolve them in our water bottles. You take the pills, you crush them, and just throw them in your Gatorade. That's what I would do, or water bottle. It doesn't, whatever you're drinking, and sip on it throughout the day. Because no one's going to suspect the Gatorade you're drinking is full of oxycodone. It was a really easy way we would do that.
So why use so often again?
Yeah.
Why are you needing to use so often in school? Take it to school.
Yeah. Many reasons. Well, the the trauma I had from growing up in the house I did with my dad and stepmom left me with crippling anxiety because, like, think about walking on eggshells and being afraid for your life for 7 years. That's going to have a lasting impact. So I still felt that sensation to walk on eggshells and fear for my life, even when I was finally out of their house. And that anxiety made it really hard for me to interact with other people. And I was um, struggling with PTSD and depression as well. So the drugs were used to mask that, to make all those negative emotions go away, to make the anxiety go away. When I had my opioids and benzos, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't feel terrified to talk to other people. I could walk into a room and feel like the center of attention, not the black sheep everyone was going to stare at and make fun of. So you start using to get through those feelings. And it might not be the same reason for everyone. For some people, it might just be that they have anxiety or they want to fit in. It's usually a combination of a couple things. So you start using to get over all of that. You self medicate, and at first, it's not every day, but it'll become that because like it grows and grows. You will need to take more and more, and you just don't want to feel crappy every day. Like you don't want to feel anxious every day. You don't want to feel depression every day. So you try and do the drugs as much as possible to help you get through the day.
And when did you notice you started having like a physical dependence to it?
Yeah. Hmm. Probably when I was 13 or 14. I would at first it was just I would be a lot more anxious and jittery without my benzos especially, but opioids too. Um, but I would start getting incredibly volatile when I didn't have them. Like my emotions would be all over the place, and I would yell out in these incredibly loud, violent outbursts, like not physically violent, but verbally and emotionally toward my family. Um, and then I would just scream and scream and be incredibly angry. And then as I got more dependent on opioids, um, that was probably when I was 14 and a half ish. I would start getting really bad shakes. And my legs would kick out. So like if I was just sitting still or laying there, all of a sudden my leg would like jerk out like someone pulled my tendon or something like that. Um, and you you start getting nausea as well, especially from the opioids when you're not on them. You get this nauseous feeling where it's almost like you woke up really hungover, that type of nausea, and you have this terrible taste in your mouth and this weird itch in the back of your throat. And the more and like that only makes you want to do the opioids more, right? But the further you go on using, the worse the withdrawal will get when you're not on them, to the point where you start throwing up and really can't function at all.
Did you know when you obviously didn't know you were getting yourself into that kind of tolerance trap?
Right, right.
Does the withdrawal compound with your natural anxiety and other mental health? Does it make it more severe?
For sure, for sure. They do compound on one another. Um, yeah, your anxiety will be worse than it had ever been before you started using, because the withdrawal will make your normal anxiety worse. And that'll just cycle in your brain like, oh my God, I'm already anxious. I'm going through withdrawal. And the withdrawal makes the normal anxiety worse. It'll make you more depressed too. And the withdrawal also makes you do things you never expected yourself to be able to do, like steal from your family, steal from anyone you know you could get drugs from. So like it turns you into a person you never thought you would be as well.
Is there anything that schools could do to try to prevent these pills from getting in, or is it just part of the family's culture, the greater culture as a whole?
Um, yeah, that's I think further education, like not I don't think fear mongering is the right way to go about it. Um, but being honest about what these drugs can do, how they affect you, and further education about what actual addiction is, not just fear mongering about addiction, but actually teaching how addiction works and what leads to it, um, is really important. And schools carrying Narcan, and giving out test strips too, like fentanyl test strips, I think would be great. Um, but like it's not just kids that are in this. It's also like people in their early 20s that are selling drugs to the kids, and parents that are selling drugs to kids. Like a lot of people don't want to hear that. One of my good friends, his dad had a prescription for codeine and oxycodone. And on the first of the month, he would sell me all of his codeine and oxycodone. And then I had another friend, her mom would get Subutex and Percocet every month. So she would sell me her Subutex and Percocet every month. So it's also parents that are making this worse as well, because they are selling to kids as well. It's not just kid to kid or young adult to kid.
But do you think kind of the older kids teaching the younger kids once they get into high school and sort of that, is that how it continues on?
Part of it, yeah. I think the older kids definitely do make it worse. but it's also the natural curiosity of the younger kids as well that leads a lot of them to use. But I think if there was some way to try and stop the older kids from kind of taking someone under their wing to teach them, it would make a difference. Because I had someone like that when I was a freshman, there was a junior that kind of took me under his wing and showed me, I guess, the ropes of the real drugs underworld.
Why do you think he did that?
I think he thought he was doing the right thing. They don't realize like it's a negative thing. Because I was already doing drugs and seeking them. He was like, "Yeah, let me help you. Let me show you where to get them. Let's do them together."
So, like, doing you a favor.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, exactly. He didn't see it as something negative, and neither did I when I did that later when I was the junior.
What do you wish you had known about the biology of addiction, or what do you wish you had known about how it works and where that path leads back then?
So much, so much. I wish I knew how it would make my mental health symptoms worse in the long run. First of all, because that's why I started using. Is I hated myself. I had crippling anxiety and depression. So I started using to feel better. In the long run, it's going to make you feel worse because of the withdrawal and the negative impacts it has on your brain, which leads me to the second thing, the negative impacts it has on your brain. Your dopamine reward system is going to be forever altered. Well, not forever. It will recover, but it doesn't fully recover in all people. And then uh, the memory damage, the benzos destroyed my memory. I forget. It is so difficult for me to remember simple, basic things people don't even think about. Um, I leave items everywhere. I can't remember appointments, all sorts of stuff. I double booked, for instance, us to do this podcast because I couldn't remember the other appointment. And then the third thing, which is huge, physical effects. You don't expect to one day have a physical health condition because of the drugs you were doing as a teenager. I know so many people that have that. One of my coworkers has a GI issue that's really serious and has landed them in the hospital. Me, I have a bladder issue. If you had told me when I was 11, hey, the hydrocodone is going to make it so you have to use catheters for the rest of your life, I wouldn't believe you. But now I am using catheters for the rest of my life. And if you don't know what that is, it's a little device you have to put inside you to urinate. And uh, yeah, I have a neurogenic bladder or neuropathic bladder. And I didn't know that's where this would lead. Um, Especially from my overdoses. I didn't know this is where it would lead. And I have been in the hospital 6 times in the past 3 months now because of my bladder. And that is directly because of my drug use and especially my overdoses.
Tell me about how gaming and opioids work together for you.
Yeah. So when I gaming became an escape for me when I was in school, especially around the age of like 10, 11, because that's when I got into competitive Call of Duty and I was part of a team called TapX, and we would break world records in Call of Duty and upload them to our YouTube channel. And it became very high stakes. Your reputation gets wrapped up in it. And so I was setting all these world records, and like you are looking for something to enhance that. And for me, that was Thabine based opioids. Those are opioids like oxycodone and hydrocodone. Thabine is a stimulant. It's very similar to caffeine that is found in the opioid or opium poppy. So they use that to build opioids like oxy and Vicodin or hydrocodone. So if you're taking high doses, it is actually a stimulant, and will keep you up unless you take enough to nod out. But I was taking enough where it was a really good stimulant and would help me focus. So the longer and harder I would play trying to break a world record, the more of those opioids I was taking to keep my concentration and focus and make sure my aim was perfect. And then chasing all those world records that I was also incredibly stressful. So you're also taking them for that, and it becomes where you can't even play unless you have your drugs. Um, and eventually, I ended up quitting gaming because of the stress, and I was just seeking drugs so often I didn't even have time to game because my addiction became so overwhelming that I was constantly doing and trying to seek drugs that I didn't have time to game. And gaming was something I really loved.
And it demonstrated a lot of your skills and strengths,
Right. Right. And I just threw that away because drugs was more important.
and you needed to kind of improve on the significance. The significance alone of having world records wasn't enough for you.
Yeah. No, I stopped caring about that completely, even though it was something I loved to do, and I made so many friends doing that. I just threw that out because I needed drugs more, and I sold all my gaming stuff to supply myself with more drugs. Well, that only gave me drugs for like a week and a half. So now I don't have any of my gaming stuff, and I'm gonna have to find new ways to make money to get drugs. And the the constant yearning for drugs often leads to drug dealing as well. Like for myself, I ended up in my first treatment, I met a kid who could get me LSD, and we didn't have that in my town. So I ended up meeting his big connection, and my way of supplying myself with drugs was selling LSD to everybody because that would give me more than enough money. I would be able to buy my benzos and opioids, and I'd be set. So that it also leads often to riskier behaviors, the drug seeking.
Did the drugs dim the pleasure of interesting things, naturally interesting things like gaming?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So I quit gaming. I have always been a nerd and really into science. I stopped reading. I even stopped going to school when I was 14. I just stopped. I stopped going in. I would go in like once, twice a week. And half the time I wouldn't show up till third or fourth period or lunchtime in between third or fourth period. And when I was 15, I just stopped going completely. I dropped out. And I stopped doing a lot. Everything became about seeking drugs, and nothing else really mattered. I stopped playing sports. I loved baseball. I was a great pitcher. Um, and I just stopped, and also had some damage to my shoulder that made me stop playing baseball, but I could still play other positions. But I just stopped. Drugs made me stop doing so much that I loved, and I've had to rediscover that after I got into recovery.
And how did you contribute to the culture of drugs in schools, coming into schools? Did you pass that on to younger people too?
Yeah, so I was a dealer. I sold LSD. That was my big thing I sold. And kids would take LSD during school that I sold to them. Um, and then I would help facilitate pill deals too because I would get a cut of it and get my pills out of it. And I met someone in the bathroom every day to sell drugs. That's where most of the drug deals are going on in schools, is in the bathroom. This one kid would give me his Adderall every day. I would sell it to someone. I would give him part of the money, and I would keep part of the money myself. And then, yeah, you kind of build a network of people who are interconnected who can move drugs throughout school. And the younger kids come into that and become part of the network. And then as you are leaving school, become the network. Yeah, and it's so easy. Like it's yeah, there's always going to be someone that wants what you have. It's not hard to move whatever you have. You just need to be connected to that network of people who does drugs, which is over half the school, at least where I went to school in Cottage Grove.
Do you know anyone else who overdosed in school?
Yep. There was this, yeah. There's this one kid. He was always buying Xanax. He took what are the 2 milligram bars that are often called Hulks. He took way too many. He he was struggling to walk, and he was leaning up against the lockers, and like he would bang his head against the side of the locker or the side of the locker because he was struggling to walk, and he would lean up on it and he just collapsed. And yeah, people were just screaming at him. Uh, and he all he did was then leave school because they kicked him out. They didn't try and help, even though it was pretty obvious what was going on. Same as when I overdosed in class. Um, then I'm sure there was more than that too, that I just don't remember. But that's the one off the top of my head that I remember. And he was a nice kid. I ended up going to treatment with him later on, and neither of us got sober from that treatment. But that's another thing about treatment too. Like, you want kids to get into treatment and get help, but it's also where kids get connections, make more connections. Like, they go to treatment and meet a kid from the town over that can get them this that they can't get. Because that is how I initially got my LSD connection when I was 13. I met the kid from the town over. And so treatment is amazing when done right. But if it's not done right, it can cause more harm because kids will get more interconnected from people with other cities. Basically, my drug use started because of the abuse and my mental illnesses, and I was covering that up. I started with opioids, the hydrocodone, and then I went into opioids or benzo. Sorry, because my mom had Xanax, and then my best friend's parents had drugs from the gray market, which drugs that aren't technically illegal, like bromazlam, but have the same effects as drugs like Xanax. So he had those because his parents were from Mexico. And some of those drugs that are on the gray market that aren't illegal in the United States and aren't used in the United States are used in other countries. So you can just order from them from the internet. And that's how I first got introduced to benzos. And yeah, so my benzo addiction and opioid addiction kind of went hand in hand. They escalated together. And my first overdose was when I was 13 off of those gray market benzos. I took about 140 milligrams of bromazlam, which is like 140 milligrams of Valium, into a 13-year-old kid. That's going to knock you out. And ended up in the hospital, and that was the first time. And I ended up going to my first treatment after that, but that's when I made the LSD connection, which helped me get more drugs because I was able to fund it. And after that, I had another overdose from morphine when I was done with my outpatient there. And that was my first actual opioid overdose. And I met this other kid named Alex, and he loved opioids as much as I did. Because at that time, most of the kids loved benzos more than opioids, but him and I loved opioids the same. So our use escalated together. We would go from doing like 40 to 50 milligrams of oxy per day. And toward the end, we were doing upwards of 150 milligrams of oxy a day. And at that time, um, seriously, when you're doing that much oxy, it's ridiculously expensive. It's usually $1 a milligram. So at that time, it's just easier to switch to heroin and fentanyl. So that's what we did. And we met this girl who could get us any opioid we wanted, including heroin and fentanyl, and our use went crazy from there. And I remember not my last overdose, but the last one before I started doing heroin and fentanyl. I took 40 milligrams of Xanax and 150 milligrams of hydrocodone, and I was overdosing on my cousin's couch, and we were all just talking, and no one knew I was overdosing. They just thought I was tired, and I was in and out of consciousness for like 6 hours. Um, I would wake up for like a few seconds at a time, say something, and then fall back into it. And no one knew or understood what was going on. And I I felt so close to death that time. Um, I it's almost like you want that because that level of high feels incredible, but also you're so close to death, it's terrifying. But you chase after that high then. So you're almost chasing the overdose. And that is really what set up my final overdose and like the progression with heroin and fentanyl, because it's so much more potent than the other opioids I was on. And like you can attain that feeling so much easier, which makes it even easier to overdose. Yeah, yeah. And after that last overdose, that is when I went into my final treatment, which is in St. Cloud, that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, tell me about how they detoxed you off opioids and what kind of treatment's available for people that are stuck in a trap
Yeah,
of daily opioid use and high tolerance, and they're basically just using to get out of withdrawals,
right.
like that endless hamster wheel.
Yeah,
For those people, what could you tell them about your detox?
right. Well, this is in 2016. I went to Recovery Plus in St. Cloud. It's an adolescent treatment center. They also have an adult one. It was an incredible place. Yeah, so I fought tooth and nail not to go. Um, but I went. I was forced into it by the courts. And yeah, my withdrawal was horrific. They gave me naltrexone, which helped with the withdrawal a bit until I got Suboxone. And Suboxone is like a wonder drug. When you're first coming off of opioids and they give it to you, for the first few hours, you will still go through withdrawal. But after it is fully in your system, you won't have serious withdrawal. You might still be a little shaky, but once you're on the right dose, all that's gone. So the fear of withdrawal is really what keeps a lot of people away from getting help, because once you take your drugs, you know in a certain amount of time that you'll start going through withdrawal. So the clock is ticking for you to get more drugs. And that cycle keeps you from getting help. It really keeps you from getting help. But nowadays there's options like Suboxone or methadone. And when with that withdrawal as well, because of that cycle, yeah, you're using more and more. And like you're chasing really the first time you did that drug or one of the times you OD'd on it, because that's the best high. But you're never going to get that again, because neurochemically in the brain you can't get that feeling again. So you are often with the withdrawal using to feel normal. um, it really is to feel normal toward the end. You just don't want to be sick, so you're using to avoid being sick and to just function like a normal human. And the high generally becomes less pleasurable as well because of that. Because dopamine receptors in the brain decrease, and so do the opioid receptors. They decrease the further you go into addiction, which seems backwards, but it's how it works. And because of that, you're mostly using to not be sick and to function like a normal human. It's sad, but it's what ends up happening.
The brain seems to be adapting
Yeah,
to the chemicals that you're putting into it.
it definitely adapts.
It's reacting to it and it's counterbalancing. So can you describe your detox, and
Yeah.
was it painful? What was it like to get off of those opioids at this one center, Recovery Plus in St. Cloud?
Yeah, Recovery Plus is incredible. I would recommend it to anyone. They do medication assisted treatment there where they can give you naltrexone, they can give you Valium, methadone, Suboxone. For me, it was Suboxone. And for the first couple hours after they give you Suboxone, you are still going to feel awful. But once that medication finally works its way into your system, after a couple hours and they get you to the right dose, you can wean off of the opioids you're on incredibly well. You're still going to have some like little withdrawal. Well, you're still going to feel shaky every now and then. You still might get nauseous every now and then, or have the scratchy feeling in your throat or the itch in your throat. but it really takes away that intense withdrawal you're dreading. And the fact, like, we know medication assisted treatment has higher positive outcomes for people in recovery than just abstinence. And having those options available and having it be less stigmatized nowadays is vital, because of what we fear the most when we're using is that horrific withdrawal. It's like the flu times 10. So if we can ease through that with a medication, it makes it so much easier to get into recovery. And some people will stay on those medications for years too, because they help. It's not just helping with the withdrawal, but it helps with the cravings too. I've been in recovery for 6 years. So I use Suboxone to get off of my opioids. But for a year and a half after that, my cravings were so intense, I couldn't function. So I went to a clinic where they could I could have Suboxone as a normal maintenance medication with my mental health medications. And ever since I got on Suboxone as a maintenance thing, I've been able to function in society again. I can work a job, I can go hang out with friends, I can play a game, I can play video games, I could interact with my family and dogs and cat. But before that, like, my brain was just so used to having the opioids. I felt overwhelming, awful cravings all the time. And having an option that can take that away and make it way easier to deal with is incredible and so important for people struggling from opioid addiction. I will recommend MAT, medication assisted treatment, to the ends of the earth because it saved my life.
What is Suboxone?
Yeah, Suboxone is a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone. The naloxone doesn't really do much. It's mostly the buprenorphine. It's generally a sublingual medication. You just let it dissolve in your mouth for like 20 minutes and spit it out. Some people will have you swallow it, but mostly you spit it out. And it helps you. It's a partial opioid. Um, so it doesn't, after the first like week of taking it, it doesn't get you high at all. It just helps you manage the cravings. And it has this wonderful ceiling effect where even if you take like 10 of them, it won't get you high because it has this cutoff point where even taking more doesn't do anything. So once you've been on it, you still can't even get high from it. But it helps you manage those awful, intense cravings you get for opioids and the longing and almost the lust you feel for opioids. It helps manage that a ton and makes it much easier to function in life, honestly. And there's another really cool effect of it where if you're on your Suboxone and you try and do another opioid, unless you do an incredibly high amount, you're you're not going to feel anything from the opioid. So it is a life-saving medication.
Can you tell me if you had a moment that you can recall where you had like an inner transformation and you finally realized this is not sustainable, something needs to change?
Yeah. That for me, I still had an overdose after I got out of treatment, but that moment happened for me in treatment. I was with my counselor and my mom came in and she had written me this letter and she was crying her eyes out and was reading me this letter about how my addiction has affected her and how she's so terrified of losing me. And I sat there and I just kind of rubbed her arm and went, "It's okay, mom." And on the inside, I was dying, but I wouldn't show it on the outside. I had a, stone cold face. And I was just like, "It's okay, it's okay." And we finished, and I just told her I loved her, and I went to my room and just cried my eyes out because I finally understood how much this was affecting not just myself but also her. And I felt awful, and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna try." And that's when I found um one of the aides there at treatment that I really connected with. And I was 16, 17 at the time, and she was only 20, and her and I connected, and she told me I was a drug addict, and for the first time I believed it because of everything my mom read and because everyone around me had been telling me that for years, but I was like, "Nah, I'm just having fun." So having someone I could connect with and then hearing how much it broke my mom was really that moment. And I tried in treatment and I intended to be sober, but a couple months after I got out of treatment, I went and used once and had an overdose. Do you want to talk about that? Um, okay. Yeah, so
Is this after a significant period off opioids, or were you still on Suboxone?
I was off of Suboxone because I got out of treatment. I had
Okay.
been sober for 4 months, and I went and hung out with an old friend, which you got to start cutting people off when you're in recovery. I made the mistake of not doing that. Um, so we went to our old dealer's house and got a bunch of oxy and fentanyl pills, and I snorted 150 milligrams of oxy because that's what my tolerance was, and there was um, a couple pills laced with fentanyl I also snorted, and I remember doing that and then being in the car and buying a bunch of Xanax too. So then I took the Xanax. I think it was 6 of them.
How'd you talk yourself into doing that again after everything you'd learned in treatment and the experience with your mom?
Well, in my head the entire time I was like, well, I'm just gonna hang out with them. It'll be fine. And then as we got to the dealer's house, I was like, fuck, I don't want to do this. But as soon as I was there and saw the drugs, it was like my self control went out the window. There is no self control. It was like I went into autopilot. Like pills were being crushed, they were going up my nose. There was no thought almost. It was seriously like autopilot. Um, and then once I got home from that, my brother knew I was fucked up. Um, he was like, "What the hell did you take?" And I was like, "Dude, I just smoked weed. Chill out." But I didn't. I didn't even smoke weed when I was in active use because it gives me incredibly bad anxiety. It has that effect on some people with really bad anxiety disorders. And he knew I was lying. And so I went down into my room. I snorted some more fentanyl and oxy pills, and my he called my mom. My mom comes racing home. And they keep asking me, what did you take? But I am so high at this point I can barely speak. And I'm like, nothing. But obviously that's a lie. And my brother carried me to the car, and they're racing to the hospital, and my brother had to hold me down in the car because even though I was super high and could barely function, I kept trying to get out. And he yeah, we got to the hospital. My mom and my brother are like dragging me into the hospital because I can't walk and I'm still trying to fight them, even though I can barely function. And I hardly remember any of this. I hardly remember any of it, because of all the drugs I took, especially the Xanax, because that has really big effects on your memory. And then like it was almost like I teleported, and then I'm on a bed in the hospital, and I'm looking up, and I see this pretty nurse, and I just say, "You are very pretty," and um, they have me on Narcan. But the hospital they first took me to, like they couldn't handle what was happening. So they took me by ambulance to another hospital, and they had to keep me on a constant IV of Narcan. Normally they just shoot you with Narcan, like inject it into you or shoot it up your nose, and you're good after 1 or 2 doses. But that was not working. I took so much shit. They had to constantly have me on an IV, and my oxygen was down to 40%. So I was very close to death, and I am very lucky that my mom and brother worked as hard as they did to get me into the hospital, and that I had such a good nurse team. And my mom is a nurse, so I think part of that, what kept me alive, was her until I got there. Um, but
Why'd you take such a high dose?
because that's what I used to do.
You weren't aware of that you had much lower tolerance over time?
Yeah, so the highest risk of time for overdose for an addict is after they get out of treatment, because we'll try and use like we used to before we got in treatment, even though our tolerance will go down. And a lot of us are also aware our tolerance is lowered, but we'll think, oh my God, we can do the same amount. It'll just feel a lot better. So that's what I was thinking. And honestly, the reason why people chase such a high dose too is because overdosing feels incredible. Like the actual high you get from it. Overdosing in general feels embarrassing and awful, but the high you get from it feels so good. But waking up in that hospital and knowing how you affected others, you feel so much shame. I woke up, I don't know, probably at like 2 in the morning that night, and I was like, why the hell am I here? I didn't even remember what had happened. And memories have come back to me over time, but I didn't even remember what had happened. And I look up at the nurse and I'm like, I'm fairly certain I had taken drugs. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Why am I here? Is Did I overdose? Is my mom here? And she said, yes, she's right there. And I rolled over and she was sleeping there in the hospital next to me. And I just started crying my eyes out. And I was like, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I fucked up. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do this again. And you feel so much shame and guilt, and you feel like a failure and like you're nothing. Like you are the dirt on the bottom of someone's shoes. You are seriously nothing. Um, yeah. And my mom took me home the day after that, after they knew I was stable. Um, yeah, she took me home that, like, I was in there during the night and she took me home in the afternoon. Um, so I stayed overnight. And the sick thing is, that was the 25th of November when I overdosed. So I went home on the 26th. Um, the sick thing is, I go down into my room. I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm going to rest. When I go down into my room, I find drugs because I hadn't taken them all the night before. I found some oxy and fentanyl pills and some Xanax. Did I go, hey, mom, I found these, throw them out? No. I snorted them all, even though I had just gotten home from the hospital of an overdose, like that hour. And luckily, there was so much Narcan in my system that they didn't do anything. So it was like I had taken nothing, essentially, even though I snorted all that stuff. But yeah, so despite me overdosing that day and the night before, I still put all that crap up my nose the instant I got home and found them. So, like, addiction makes you do wild things you never thought you'd expect. Like, you just overdosed. Why would you do that? I have no self control when I see that thing, when I see those things, those drugs. I mean, nowadays I'd probably be okay now that I'm 6 years into recovery, but at the time, no. And so, yeah, my sober date isn't the 25th when I overdosed, uh, or isn't the 26th when I overdosed on the 25th because I went home on the 26th and did the drugs I found in my room. It's the 27th. So yeah, it's crazy. Even though I overdosed, the instant I got home and found more pills, I crushed them and snorted them all. Addiction doesn't make sense.
So that was it. That was the end.
That was the end. That was finally the end. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are you doing now for a living?
Yeah, now I help other people get through addiction and get into recovery. It took me a while to get here. After I first got sober, things still weren't great with my mental health. It took a few years for me to get my mental health in order because that was the entire reason I was using. But after I about 4 years of being in recovery, when my mental health finally got in order, I got a job and I was just working at this gas station and I had this mental health worker helping me work on things I wanted. And I was like, I think I want to help other people with their addictions and get into recovery because and I had started gaming again and there were people suffering from addiction in my gaming community and I helped get them into recovery and get sober and that made me feel really good. Um so I pursued that. I found what peer recovery was. I took a class at Minnesota Recovery Connection, and it like kind of lit a fire in me. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is incredible. And I took the test to become a certified peer recovery specialist about a year later, just because I didn't think I was ready yet right after I took the course. I passed the test and I was really scared to start working in the field. I was like, I'm a child. What am I going to do? But I started applying for jobs and I saw one at Minnesota Recovery Connection where I took the class. And this one was to work with the Allina virtual addiction care team. And they needed someone who was fluent in technology because the people before me weren't and they couldn't get the program to work how it was supposed to with a peer recovery specialist. And I interviewed and I hadn't had a job in the field before, but they really liked my energy, like the passion I brought to it and the fact that I was technology literate. And they took a chance. My supervisor Aubrey took a chance and hired me. And so since October of 2022, I've been working at MRC and Alina's virtual addiction care team, helping other people get sober and get into recovery and off drugs and off alcohol, which is a drug. But yeah, it is such rewarding work. Um, and I also host the Monday and Wednesday LGBTQ plus all recovery meetings we have at MRC, um, which is vital. I didn't accept my sexuality until I was 19, and a bunch of the shame around my sexuality drove me to use drugs. My best friend was this guy named Alex who was gay, and I couldn't accept the fact that I was pansexual and like so I would make fun of him. But now that I've accepted myself that I'm pansexual, like I can host these meetings for other queer people in recovery because there are many resources for queer people in recovery. And it is one of the coolest things I get to do with my job. We have such a cool community through those meetings. And I've never been a person that likes AA and NA because of the spirituality and religious aspect. And that's something I like about the all recovery meetings. They are person centered. If religion's a part of your recovery, you can talk about that, but there's no mandate to talk about anything. We talk about you could talk about whatever you want, and then there's four things you check in on: your physical health, emotional health, mental health, and if you have any spiritual or religious beliefs, your spiritual health. I don't have those beliefs, so I just do the first three. But if you have all four, then you check in on all four, and those meetings are incredible. And I've also gotten cool speaking opportunities, like at Hastings High School, and this awesome podcast. So I'm very passionate about helping people who are struggling with addiction and getting into recovery. It's what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Can you tell me about your spiritual orientation or religious identities? What would you label yourself as, and how did you land on that?
Well, I'm an atheist. I don't really think any of that exists. I think there's a couple things that led to that. I grew up in a Jewish and like a secular Jewish and a Christian home. So like they were both taught to me. And um I've also been like super into reading and science from a young age. And I don't know, I don't believe in any of it just because of a lack of evidence. It doesn't have to do with like anger at God. Like when I tell people I'm an atheist, they'll be like, "Why are you angry at God?" It doesn't have to do with anything like that. It's just a lack of evidence for me. If there was hard evidence, I would want to believe that, because I think you should only believe in something if there's really good evidence for it.
Did that make your early recovery or treatments more difficult?
Yes. Oh my God, yes. Because even in treatment, people would push like you have to have a higher power. You have to have a higher power. I'm like I'm an atheist. I don't believe that stuff. And people would tell me I would fail because I didn't have a higher power and believe in a God. And it was so frustrating. And I also think it devalues the work you do in recovery because people will be like, it's all my higher power that I'm sober. But then I'll say, like, you're the one doing the work to remain sober and be in recovery. You need to give yourself some credit. Yes, your belief it's probably helping you, no doubt, but give yourself credit for all the hard work you're doing as well. But yeah, it was really hard because everything back in 2017 was 12 step based. And everyone was telling me I needed to believe in a higher power, God. And that is honestly one of the reasons I hated NA and AA and hated groups, because everyone would tell me that. And it's one of the things I value about all recovery meetings is that's no mandate. It's person centered. And that was a big barrier for me with groups and just treatment in general at first. And I think it is for a lot of people. I've heard that many times. So the fact that there's more options for people now is incredible.
Can you compare the fulfillment of being engaged in the world and having these groups and
Mm.
helping people and connecting with people with the isolation, but the pleasure of intoxicants?
Yeah, it's much more substantive. It's not fleeting. Like with drugs, it's always a fleeting feeling you're chasing, especially with opioids, because nothing is going to feel as good as that first high or first overdose. So it's a fleeting feeling you're constantly chasing. But when you're working with people, helping them get into recovery, it's this substantive thing you can do every single day that is benefiting your life and someone else's life. And it's something that can be there forever. Like you can have that relationship with them forever. It's not something you're chasing over and over. And you will develop things in your life too, like hobbies. Like I've gotten back into gaming. I love shading and coloring now. I spend a lot of time with my dogs. I have a beautiful partner who's the love of my life that I get to spend every day with. I have an incredible relationship with my mom, and we will nerd out to true crime together. And you develop so many substantive things that aren't these fleeting moments like it is, excuse me, with drug use and particularly opioid use.
You can build things and they don't immediately wash away.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
you continue to build a life and it takes shape and it takes time, but it's much more fulfilling, it sounds like.
Right. Especially as time goes on in recovery, because like more more options and opportunities open to you the further you go professionally, and privately. That my life is so much more fulfilling than it was 6 years ago when I was still using.
Do you have anything that you want to tell yourself that you would tell yourself had you not made it through your many overdoses?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I I understand why I did what I did. Like I understand the pain I was in and the trauma I was feeling at the time. So I don't want to shame my past self for the use, because I was doing it because of that pain and the mental health issues and the trauma. But if I hadn't have made it, like look at everything I would be missing out on now. Look at, like I said, I have a beautiful partner, the love of my life, the beautiful relationship I have with my mom, my dogs, my cats, this wonderful job, and this experience I get to have on a podcast, the work I do helping other people in recovery. Um, get, Getting to play with my cat every day is one of the coolest things in my life. Getting back into gaming and rediscovering my passion for science and learning, like all of those things would be gone if hadn't made it through my pain and made it through those overdoses. Um, so I think that's what I would tell my past self, especially toward the end, um, when I saw no hope in life, is that there is a ton of hope. Um, that there's so much hope. Uh, it's not. It's something that you can build on yourself. Um, it isn't all doom and gloom, even though it'll feel like that at first when you get into recovery.
What kind of resources would you suggest to, let's say there's kids out there using in high school and buying pills from their friends, and if maybe they were curious about trying to stop the cycle and get out of that trap, what kind of resources would you give kids to seek a website they could go to read more and learn more of how to escape?
Yeah, there's a lot of places. The Steve Remler Hope Foundation's great. They have resources to talk whenever, and we'll also give out Narcan. I think even if you're not using, if you're just friends that are, carrying Narcan on you is incredible. You can get Narcan from them. You can talk to them whenever. I work for Minnesota Recovery Connection. We have meetings you can come to straight from the website, and you could call in whenever, and we will call you back. There, the Allina virtual addiction care that I work with as well. You could just call Allina and ask for that. Rise Up Recovery is great too. Twin Cities Recovery Project, the Hope Dealers instead of Dope Dealers, it's Hope Dealers. There's a lot of places you could reach out to for queer youth. The Trevor Project is incredible. Honestly, there's a lot of resources out there nowadays to just call and have someone listen. And there's this really great one, Never Use Alone, where you can call in and someone will sit there with you while you're doing whatever drugs you have. So just in case you stop replying, they can call an ambulance to make sure you're okay. So Never Use Alone is incredible. And hopefully once we get some safe use centers opened in Minnesota as well, you can go there in person, so they can save you if you overdose. There's really a lot of places. It's hard to think of them off the top of my head.
How long has it been since you've used any of those drugs, your drug of choice?
November 27th, 2016. So I'm 23. I was 17. Yeah, I was 17. So coming up on 7 years now. Really cool.
Noah, you are so brave and so strong.
Thank you.
Having done probably the most difficult human behavioral change that can be done.
Breaking an addiction,
and you've sustained it, and you've transformed it into service for the better good of your community. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you for telling your story. Thanks for letting us get to know you. I really appreciate you coming by, Noah. And that's a wrap for my first interview with Noah. If you'd like to hear more about the world of substance use disorder counseling, addiction recovery, prevention, and treatment, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with anyone you think would benefit from hearing it. I can't wait to have more interesting conversations with Noah. Post any topic requests or follow-up questions you'd like to hear in the comments. And for any of you out there that are still suffering and stuck in a tolerance trap that you just can't get out of, I want you to know that I know what it's like to be in the quicksand, the hell, the tolerance trap of addiction. I've depended on everything from 1.5 liters of vodka a day to half of a tiny pill to get through the day. And I feared for my life if I did not get this drug into my body every single day. And I want to report from where I am today that it is so much better to be free. To think with the clarity of a natural mind, free of chemicals, and to feel the subtle pleasures of life fully. I challenge you to set yourself free. We fall for a lot of addictive traps, both set by us and by nature, especially the caffeine sleep deprivation trap, which I'll discuss in an episode coming soon. I believe we can be more ambitious as a species. I believe freedom is the best trip you'll ever have. If you have any questions, ideas, or if you'd like to contribute, you can contact me at setyourselffreepod@gmail.com. Music by Carly Thomas. Check out carlythomas.com. Cover photography by Jennifer Mao Jones. The writing, the studio, the sound mixing, the editing was all done by me, and thank you to the people who have encouraged me to create this. Here's a little preview from next week's show.
You know, and it goes back to prohibition, but like the fact that alcohol is legal and so glamorized is a big thing. I mean, part of that comes from the advertisements and the TV shows and all that stuff that I saw. Alcohol is just, there's nothing negative about it in social media. I mean, there are negative things now that my eyes are a little more open, but growing up, it was just, all the advertisements are like, people partying on a yacht and beautiful women all around them and all these wonderful friends, and everyone's got smiles on their faces and they're glistening and beautiful. And I was just like, man, if I use that stuff, then maybe I'll get to that point one day. But it also doesn't, those short little 30-second advertisements don't express like the hard work that it takes to get a yacht and the hard work that it takes to, be the person that you were meant to be and make those friends and make those connections and just everything that goes into it. It's simply, you drink this alcohol and you have access to these things.
Send me your thoughts so we can broaden the dialogue at setyourselffreepod@gmail.com. You can find more episodes at justinthomascollection.com and click on the podcast tab to join our mailing list.